This was extremely, extremely tragic. There was a massacre, a shooting in Buffalo. Really terrible. Really, really awful. You know, I was very sad when I heard about this. And what happened is there's a guy who went to a supermarket in Buffalo, which is in New York, and he shot and killed 10 people. Just randomly. He picked this place on purpose so that he could target African Americans, so he could target black people. And most of the victims are black. This is awful. This is really, really heartbreaking. And just to read you from the BBC, okay, so this is what happened. So the suspect, who's 18, drove more than 320 kilometers to carry out what is believed to be a racially motivated crime. He planned to keep driving, and, well, you can see it. Again, I'm afraid of the algorithm, so I'll try and make it as big as possible so you can read with me without me actually having to say it. You know, censorship. A pensioner, a former policeman, and a grandmother were among the victims. The Mayor Brown said that the suspect arrived in Buffalo intending to take as many black lives as possible. And then he published a 180-page document that appears to be authored by him, right, which has emerged online. And he describes himself as a fascist and a white supremacist. What I wanted to say about this is that this guy, first of all, they arrested him alive. Good, that's how it should be, right? But my point is, because in England, for example, I mean, for this would have been classified as a terrorist incident. They would have sent the quick response units, which have, I think, MP5s or G36. They have, they're authorized to use deadly force. But in the UK, the police do not have guns. They carry truncheons, even the pepper spray and tasers are something new. But my point is that if this guy, the suspect here, or the gunman, was not white, I have a feeling he wouldn't have been arrested alive. But this is not the main point that I wanted to make, even though it is worth pointing out. What's really, really interesting here is that he was wearing a symbol, and this symbol is what's referred to as a sun wheel. And there are many kinds of sun wheels, but this one specifically is a black sun, and a sun wheel in German is Sonnenrad. And then the black sun is Schwarze Sonne. And this is a symbol that was, used by the Nazis. And what I'm trying to say here is that right now, the recipients of US weapons in Ukraine are the Azov Battalion, okay? So look at their logo for a second. This is the Azov Battalion. They have actually two Nazi symbols in there, or shall we say, symbols that were co-opted by the Nazis and now have a Nazi connotation. So in the middle is the Wolfsangel, or Wolf's Hook. In the yellow, you can see so this is the Wolfsangel, the black thing in the middle, and then behind that is the black sun, right? Well, in this case, it's not black, but it's still a sun wheel, yes? And the Azov Battalion are a very, very powerful battalion in Ukraine, right? And they've been around for several years. And, they have a party, and they have training camps, and they're not like some fringe group. They're actually in the Ukrainian armed forces. They're integrated in the Ukrainian armed forces, and they are Nazis. They're very clearly Nazis. This is the exact same symbol, the sun wheel, that the shooter in Buffalo had on, that he was wearing, right? So look at this. Do you see here? That's what he was wearing. Right there on the right, you can see a Ukrainian soldier from the Azov Battalion wearing the same thing. So don't you find it interesting that in the United States, you can very clearly, the people have no problem looking at this guy and saying, this guy's a white supremacist, he's a racist. But then when it comes to Ukraine, they give white supremacists and Nazis weapons. I mean, this is madness. You have to look at this and just be stunned, right? It is truly stunning. And I want to be very clear, when people say that the Azov Battalion are Nazis, that's not an exaggeration, because I know in today's day and age, in this day and age, in the West, anybody who doesn't agree with Israel or who criticizes Israel, oh, you're a racist. Basically, the neoliberal establishment, they throw around this term to the point that it doesn't mean anything, which is very bad, because when we actually have racism, real racism, to call out, they have made this term diluted, right? They've diluted it and watered it down. That's the danger of it. But in this case, when we talk about the Azov Battalion, it's not an exaggeration to say that they're Nazis, because you have to understand, in Ukraine, you had Nazi collaborators like Stepan Bandera, who's the most notorious one. People always mention him. He collaborated with the Nazis to kill Polish people, Poles, Jews. He participated in the Holocaust. And even after World War II, the CIA was protecting this guy and other people from this, this group of Nazi collaborators. And, people in the Azov Battalion revere this guy, right? They go on marches and they have banners of him and just openly glorifying him. And they don't hide their ideology, right? They don't make a secret of it. It's only the BBC and CNN that are now making a secret of it, because they want to attack Russia and support the war against Russia. So if they tell you that, hey, the guys that the US and the EU are sending weapons to in Ukraine are Nazis, you are going to sit there and go, what? And so these guys, they sport lots of Nazi insignia. And what makes this even more interesting is that this gunman who killed the 10 people very tragically in Buffalo, he, like I said, like the BBC article said, he published a manifesto. And in this manifesto, it appears that he plagiarized, right, passages from the Christchurch shooter. So again, this is really sickening, and I don't like talking about these things because they're so awful. But this was in New Zealand. You remember there was a guy who went in a mosque and he killed, I think it was 50 people and wounded another 50. It's outrageous. And he live streamed it on Facebook. He live streamed this massacre. I mean, it's shocking beyond words, truly shocking beyond words. And that guy was wearing a flak jacket with what? The black sun. So this is from Time magazine, right? From last year, they were talking about him. He was wearing a flak jacket bearing a black sun. And so this guy, yesterday in Buffalo, over here on the left, copied parts of that guy's manifesto from the Christchurch massacre and even put the same symbol on his chest. So there's a connection here, right? He seems to be very clearly inspired by that guy, and he also live streamed it. So you have multiple things, the attire, the ideology, the live streaming, the act of violence itself, that are in common. Obviously, this just happened and they're gathering evidence. He had spent time in Ukraine in 2015 and mentioned plans to move to the country permanently. Now, obviously, by itself, that doesn't mean anything, right? That just because you went to Ukraine, that doesn't mean you're automatically a neo-Nazi, right? That's like saying, oh, you went to Egypt, so now you're a terrorist. That's ridiculous and insulting. What's happening in Ukraine is you have basically a network of foreign fighters that is being set up. And this is shocking because you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Pakistan. So when I was living in Pakistan as a child for about 4 or 5 years, we lived in Islamabad, but we went around the country and, I have elephant memory. So I remember very, very big chunks of this. And, went to Peshawar, to Lahore. And when we went to Peshawar, this is very interesting. And I'm not going to show you the pictures. I did a university talk online a few weeks ago, and it's on the channel here. So, just to motivate you to go watch it, I posted the photographs. Well, obviously, I didn't take them. I was too young, but I'm in them, and my mother took them. And you can see, how we were right on the border with Afghanistan. And that place was the Wild West. You cannot go there. You must apply for permission from the Khyber agency. And then when you get there, there's a sign. I put the photo out where it says, if you get, I'm paraphrasing here, but if you cross this point, you're basically on your own. And no foreigners are allowed because this place it's considered a federal tribal area. So you don't get permission from the Pakistani government. You get permission from the Khyber agency to go in there, right? And this is the early 90s, okay? Or mid 90s, I should say. Yes, because I asked my mother, the photos were in 1997, right? So what am I trying to tell you? This is right after the Cold War finished and right after the Soviet war in Afghanistan, right? So that's when the CIA was funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets in a proxy war. And what happened in this time? You had people like bin Laden who went to Pakistan in Peshawar area where we visited, and they set up an office called Maktab al-Khadamat. Maktab al-Khadamat means the bureau, or we should say, Bureau of Services, or Service Bureau. What its purpose was to get foreign fighters to come from all over the world. You know, they would buy them plane tickets, they would help with their travel arrangements to come to Afghanistan and help fight the Soviets. And these guys, of course, after the Cold War ended, went on to become Al-Qaeda, and some of them the Taliban, right? So this is why when we say the CIA and the United States helped create Al-Qaeda, it's not a joke. And when we were living in Pakistan, this is right around the time when this was happening, when Al-Qaeda was growing. And as a matter of fact, next to my school, the Egyptian embassy was bombed. And I remember that, like, the classroom blew up, and really horrible. What happened in Afghanistan and Pakistan, you see how it spiraled out of control. The Americans thought, we're just going to give all these radicals a bunch of money and bring in foreign fighters to spite the Russians. And that's it. Al-Qaeda spread from Pakistan and Afghanistan to Syria, to Iraq, to Libya, to Yemen. And so they created a terrorist organization. They funded and trained and armed it in a proxy war. And then it spread and caused immeasurable suffering. And they used that same problem that they created to start more wars and more suffering. So my point here is that when you have all of these white supremacists, neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them, that are traveling to Ukraine to join the Azov battalion and get training from them, which is what has been happening in the last couple of years. What do you think is going to happen when everything in Ukraine is over? Do you think that the Azov, that the Nazis in Ukraine are just going to quietly put down the billions of dollars of weapons that they were given? You think they're just going to put that down? You know, in the Cold War in Afghanistan, the Americans were at least trying to hide, somewhat. They were somewhat trying to hide the fact that they were arming the Mujahideen. Right now, they're just openly arming Nazis in Ukraine. They don't care. It's like they want to provoke the Russians, right? It's unbelievable. And so this is a very interesting piece here by Time magazine from 2021, so just last year, where they talk about all these guys that are going to Ukraine to take part in basic training with Azov, with this Nazi battalion, right? And they're very clearly, openly white supremacist, and they hate Jews and foreigners, and they are followers of Nazi ideology, like really, really nasty stuff. And they are part of the Ukrainian National Guard. And apparently the EU and the West, they have no problem giving these guys weapons. They're officially banned from giving them. They know damn well that they're getting the weapons. You know why? Because CNN a few weeks ago said in a headline that the United States doesn't know where the weapon shipments are going. And they said the same thing in Syria, right? Oh, we're just giving non-lethal aid to these moderate rebels. Then it turns out it is lethal aid, and those rebels are not moderate. They're Al-Qaeda, right? Oh, oops. We missed, the drop was in the wrong place. The crate accidentally fell into their hands. Then we find out there's Operation Timber Sycamore, and the CIA is actually funneling weapons from Libya, where they overthrew Gaddafi, to Al-Qaeda in Syria. So this is a very, very dirty and a very, very dangerous game, right? And I think it's really ironic that people rightfully condemn this gunman with the current evidence, right, in the first 24 hours, as a white supremacist and a Nazi, and he's wearing the symbol. And they say the same thing about the Christchurch shooter. But then when it comes to Ukraine, the guys that are wearing the same symbols and more, and very proudly, overtly Nazi, they have no problem with them. Am I hallucinating? What is going on here? I want to say something. Just like Al-Qaeda spread out of Afghanistan and Pakistan, with the help, of course, of the West, what do you think is going to happen with Azov? You think they're just going to stay in Ukraine with all of this equipment, all these weapons? You don't think that they're going to become more ambitious? This is emboldening. Any group in the world, man, any group in the world, no matter what their ideology is, when you start giving them unlimited amounts of weapons, literally unlimited, like the Lend-Lease, and on top of that, billions, tens of billions of dollars, you're just encouraging them, right? You're emboldening them, no matter what their ideology is. So these guys are thinking, dude, we are openly being funded by the West. They're giving us everything we want. And then you might see copycats or affiliates or sister groups popping up. And that's how you end up with, like in Syria, you have not just Al-Qaeda anymore, but Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Syria, and then you have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and so on and so on. And you end up with 50 groups that are all sort of the same kind of crazy and violence. And this is really reckless. And the same thing, all just to spite the Russians. Oh my God. Man, you would think the Russians are Satan. Like, they act like the Russians are the most evil thing that ever existed. Like the way that they go to all these lengths to spite them and getting in bed with Al-Qaeda, getting in bed with Nazis. What on earth is going on here? It's really shocking. It's really shocking. And the denial, man, you should see the denial. The people who are saying, this symbol that he's wearing has nothing to do with the Azov Battalion. Bitch, are you blind? Are you serious? It's really like talking to a brick wall. I want to show you one example of this where people are trying to, run or carry water, shall we say, and deny that there's a connection here. There is a connection. Absolutely, absolutely a connection. This person says, there's a lot of disinformation already about the mass shooter in Buffalo. To be clear, he didn't have an Azov Battalion symbol in his manifesto. It's a Sonnenrad, black sun, which is a common white supremacist symbol. I'm sure Azov Battalion guys have posted stuff with a Sonnenrad on it, but the symbol is not an Azov thing. It's white supremacist iconography that is part of the aesthetic of a ton of neo-Nazi groups. Honestly, that's not the redeeming point that you think it is. Has she ever seen the logo of the Azov Battalion? Do I have to pull it up on the screen again? There is the Sonnenrad. There's the black sun. There's the Wolfsangel, the wolf's hook. You not only have one Nazi symbol, you have two. I don't understand how people can be in such denial. It's really crazy. These guys have swastika tattoos, and it's like, no, they're not Nazis. They're not Nazis. Russia, Russia, Russia. My goodness. Mais vous êtes malade. You remember Zelensky? Zelensky, his social media team literally posted a photo of a guy with a death's head, SS Totenkopf, on 8th of May, on VE Day, and then quickly deleted it. And if you're trying to convince people that there are no neo-Nazis in Ukraine, you're doing a really crappy job about it. It's funny because these guys, they're completely shameless about who they are, right? These Nazis. They're proudly, they're so shameful, right? They're shameless, right? They say yeah, we believe in this and we believe in that. And then the West go and cover for them. Why? Why are you covering for them? Why don't you tell us who they are? Why are you doing the same thing you did in Syria, right? Trying to paint Al-Qaeda as moderate rebels. We know who they are. Here's what Aaron said. He said, I know it's awkward, but if Democrats are going to insist on using Ukraine for a proxy war against Russia, they're going to have to admit the fact that they're allying with neo-Nazis, like Ukraine's Azov Battalion, which uses the same white supremacist symbol. And the fact that they call this disinformation, I really don't know what to say. I have, is this what you call cognitive dissonance? Because I have the impression that they are in such denial that even, physical proof, they just won't accept it, right? You can pull up as many photographs of Ukrainian, specifically Azov, with Nazi iconography and images, and they will still tell you it's disinformation. It's like, you can't win. You're talking to a brick wall. They are always right, and you are always wrong, and the truth is inconvenient, so we're just going to call it disinformation, and that's it. This guy over here, who committed this heinous, vicious, disgusting crime, that those poor people, really. I don't think anyone is saying that he went to Ukraine. But the guy that he was inspired from, the Christchurch, the guy who made the Christchurch massacre, the mosque there in New Zealand, that guy went to Ukraine, and it's not clear whether he was with Azov or not, but they are both wearing symbols that are from that are neo-Nazi symbols or have been basically, they have that connotation now. And so are Azov. So obviously there's a link here. It doesn't mean that this guy over here from Buffalo is necessarily, linked to Azov, but the fact that they are wearing the same symbols should tell you something. And I find it funny, I find it tragic that they want to condemn this guy, which is great, which is correct, but then when it comes to Ukraine, to the foreign policy and the imperialism, they turn a blind eye and they tell you that you're a liar and you're a Russian agent for pointing out the symbols. Mais c'est pas possible, ça. I just don't even know what to say. And I read this article by Glenn on his Substack. It's a good read. He was basically talking about something else as a result of this whole massacre. He was talking about how when the shooting happened, people immediately jumped at the opportunity to blame Tucker Carlson, and that this doesn't make sense because when Democrat inspired shooters, like basically people who committed massacres who watched Rachel Maddow or were fans of Bernie Sanders, when they did that, like, it was clear you're not going to go and blame Bernie Sanders or Rachel Maddow. Even though you don't like necessarily Rachel Maddow, you can't blame her for that because she didn't call for that. I'm going to say one thing here because I haven't heard many people make this point, but I just find it a bit ironic that you have people who are talking about like, oh, we are being invaded by, these brown people. What? You are invading the other countries, right? Like, just see this from my point of view, right? I look at Syria and there are American troops there, and there are American troops in Iraq, and there are American troops all over the Middle East that have invaded and killed. And then people are complaining about being invaded. I don't know. This just seems like a huge double standard to me. If anyone is going to complain about being replaced, it's the people, that were actually killed off. The indigenous, the Native Americans that were actually massacred so that European colonizers could take their land. They have a fucking right to complain, right? That actually happened. They have no representation. They have nothing. I'm really sick of seeing Syria's borders violated or Iraq's borders violated, Lebanon, Libya, and then you have people in Europe or the United States saying, oh, we're being invaded by refugees. What the fuck? What? This is really unbelievable double standard. And pay attention, because they say that about refugees. A refugee is not an immigrant. A refugee is a refugee. They're fleeing a situation like war or political persecution and taking refuge, seeking asylum, which is everybody's right under international law. And these countries in the West, they authored and signed the Refugee Convention, and now they don't want to abide by it. What is that? They would just want to shirk their responsibility. That's not okay. And, acting like refugees are just trying to take advantage or something. That's not okay. That's really insulting, especially when the countries that are saying these things, like the UK, are the ones helping create those refugees in the first place. If you don't want refugees, why are you creating them? Why do you keep bombing and invading and sanctioning? Why don't you talk about the root cause? Right? Why don't you talk about why people are fleeing these countries? Does it have something to do with your government bombing them or sanctioning them? Why don't you address that instead of blaming the victims of your foreign policy? Huh? Why don't you man up and act like a fucking adult and lay the blame at the feet of the people where it belongs, right? The corporations, the arms manufacturers, not refugees. Refugees didn't do anything to you. But in any case, I just wanted to go back to this irony, how, they have no problem calling this guy from Buffalo or Christchurch a white supremacist, and rightfully so based on their manifestos, if they're correct. But the same symbols appearing on Ukrainian soldiers, on Nazis there who are proudly, self-professed Nazis, you're not allowed to say that. That's Russian disinformation. Oh my God. We are in the twilight zone, and I have no idea what's going on, man. This is a good tweet from Ajamo Baraka. He says, don't let Democrats and their liberal left supporters get away with trying to explain away the psychological and political connection between the Buffalo shooter and Ukrainian white nationalists. But they will try. They will claim the connection is non-existent or exaggerated. Yeah, exactly. And that's why you saw like that lady saying, oh, this is Russian disinformation. Mais t'es dingue. T'es dingue. I'm angry when I start cursing in French for some weird reason. No, but seriously, this is what they're trying to do. They don't want you to understand the game. The foreign policy only works with Al-Qaeda in Syria or Nazis in Ukraine if you don't know what your government is doing. That's why they lie to you. And the media do such a good job at telling you, oh, these are not Al-Qaeda. They're moderate rebels, right? And the people calling them extremists, those are Assad supporters. These guys, they're just normal Ukrainians. They're just fighting against the Russian occupiers, right? And let's be clear, not all of the Ukrainian armed forces are Nazi, but we're talking about Azov, right? So these are not Nazis. How dare you? That's Putin propaganda. And then the irony is, while the West is arming Nazis, they turn around and call the Russians Nazis. Mish USA in the chat said, it's dead quiet in the United States media about the Buffalo Killer and Azov wearing the same Nazi logos. Thanks for mentioning this. That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point, and it shows you what they're trying to hide. Because they know what it is. They're not stupid. The people at the State Department, at the Pentagon, they know exactly who they are dealing with, just like they knew exactly that they were dealing with Al-Qaeda in Syria. They don't care, man. They will get in bed with the devil if it helps them attack the Russians and achieve their foreign policy objectives. Know that.